Welcome to the Lifelinks podcast, a safe place of belonging where we amp up our mic to openly talk with first-gen Latinas, help break free from cultural barriers, navigate the first-gen vida acá with love of culture and determination to thrive. I'm your host, Consuelo Crosby, and also creator of this content. If you would like to chat more about what you've heard here today, then reach out to me through our website at thelinks.com, that's LNXX, or through our Instagram profile at Lifelinks. I'd love to listen and engage in whatever you have to say. Hola, chicas, and welcome to our weekly Lifelinks podcast episode on this February 8th, 2023. Did you catch anything different when you started the episode? Notice any different music? No worries, don't back it up, it's all okay. There's more to come throughout today's episode, which is very special as we revel in Black History Month, celebrating the soulful Afro Latina influence of Cuba. If you recall from last week's Pod Club episode, I gave you some homework to prepare for today. But if you haven't listened to that episode yet, and you still can, or you didn't have time to do the homework, don't worry about it. Sit back, dive into this episode fresh, because it stands alone in the powerful stories and experiences of our featured guest, Marques, a native Cubana who arrived here in the U.S. alone at 7 years old through the Peter Pan program instigated by the U.S. in the 1950s. Now, if you haven't heard of this program, you definitely want to listen today and be blown away by this part of our history that no one talks about, yet has affected so many Latinas here in this country. Mari's story has an amazing rise into her family and career success, benefiting so many other Latinas and infusing her culture everywhere she went. And now, she's found her dream job, managing the fabulous, soulful Afro Latina singer, iconic songwriter of music based on the roots of the Lukumí traditions. Before there was salsa, before there was New World, before there was even big band in Cuba, there was the culture of the Lukumí derived from the Yoruba people of Cuba. Bobi Céspedes. It's Bobi's singing you heard in our intro with her band from her latest album, Mujer y Cantante. We have more of Bobi lined up for you later in the episode, and a special steamy cafecito shout-out for next week's episode. So you want to catch that, because this is a really stunning coffee house. But first, let's learn more about the woman who introduced Bobi to me. We are so grateful to have you with us today, Mari. What an adventurous, powerful life and valuable career you have had. Let's start off with you and your family's story.
Okay, I was born in Cuba. I'm Camagüey, beautiful colonial city. My mother's family, they were entrepreneurs in the city, businessmen, successful, so comfortably middle class, upper middle class. My father's family were more humble, but well-educated. His father had died when he was young, so he was an orphan, etc. So these two families, very close to both sides of the family, lots of cousins. In 1959, the Cuban Revolution succeeded. Initially, middle class supported it. My uncles had been a part of it, etc. But as it moved more towards socialism and more in conflict with the United States, Cubans started to leave who didn't support the government. During that period, this is interesting because the origins of Peter Pan go back to this American couple who had a school in Havana that served like diplomats' kids or Cuban bourgeoisie, their children, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
And they were really involved and connected to people that were interested in working against the revolution as counter-revolutionaries against Castro's new regime. But they had children. And so the initial idea was around if we could assure that these children would be safe somewhere else, these people would be free to work with CIA operatives and the Cuban counter-revolution and to involve them in these efforts. So that was the origin of this. There's a Cuban American professor, I think she's at Chicago now, University of Chicago, written a book on this. It was a covert program between the CIA and the Catholic Church, and particularly this priest in Miami who played a very important role. I think Father Walsh was his name. He was given visa waivers. He was given the ability to just distribute visa waivers to families for their children to be able to be sent to the United States without following the normal visa process without their parents. So it wasn't like these children were not orphans or anything. They did a whole campaign that really scared, and it was very much through the Catholic schools and churches and focused on the Cuban middle class, the ones that were likely to want to get involved in counter-revolution. And they scared them into thinking that their kids were going to be taken away by the new regime and sent to the Soviet Union.
Oh, Lord.
So all these parents got scared. They panicked.
Yeah.
And, it hit me much later, particularly like to think about the time, because it was shortly, in the early 50s, mid 50s is when all the atrocities of Stalin were like fully coming out.
After the war.
To really think about the impact, psychological impact and manipulation of that propaganda campaign, the power it had. When I was in Cuba, my school was around the corner, literally around the corner. The back of the school was the back of my house too. I was walked to the school. I never walked by myself to school around the corner. And my parents decided to send me and my brother and a cousin to the United States by ourselves. So you can imagine.
How old were you at that time?
I was 7.
Oh, you were a baby.
Yes. My cousin and I were both 7, and my brother was 10. There were 14,000 children who were sent. And this is, I think, from like 60 through 62. We came January 62, January 7th. I always remember that. So the kids would land in Miami, and they used these old army barracks in the Everglades, put all these kids there. If the kids had some family in the States already, they could go to family, and they didn't make the effort to connect them with family if they had family. But many kids didn't. And so they would get placed in American foster homes or orphanages and Catholic boarding schools and orphanages. So this is early 60s. And this is at the time where orphanages were moving into foster home model. They were moving away from the idea of orphanages to foster home models. Okay. And the orphanages, the kids that were there at that point were the so-called hard-to-place kids.
Oh.
So if you can imagine, kids, my brother and my cousins, for example, who ended up in an orphanage in Ohio, they were bottom of the totem pole. They had just gone from like being part of very secure family and a prosperous family, et cetera, to like nothing at the bottom of the totem pole in an orphanage. I just know I don't have the stories. They've never shared anything besides that it was rough or, what I could see from the changes afterwards. But I have done other reading and talked to other people who went through that process, and there was a lot of abuse,
On babies, on little kids.
Big trauma. For me, I was luckier because my cousin and we did have an aunt. And so we ended up living with her and a cousin in a teeny place, but at least we were with family. It wasn't easy either,
No.
Not easy at all. I was very attached to my parents. I was 7 years old.
You were 7.
Barely turned.
Little.
But it was better without a doubt. It was a better experience than having ended up in one of those schools or foster homes. And there's, a lot of people that have experiences of abuse, both in the schools and in foster homes, sexual abuse, molestation. These were kids that didn't have a lot of power. And frankly, the Catholic Church didn't really step up to take care of them. Other people will talk about the success story of Peter Pan kids, and all power to them. There are some success stories. I don't deny that in some way people feel saved and they motivated to achieve and have now become, business leaders and successful politicians. But I just want to speak to the truth of the trauma, and that was an incident of such great manipulation by both sides, because Castro used it to separate part of this destruction of Cuban families that has happened since the revolution. And the U.S. used it as part of their anti-communist. So both sides' responsibility for manipulating families and having children pay the cost of this politics.
Which is still happening. It's still happening. Very much part of the culture. So did you have any communication with your parents while you were here as a little one? Did your parents follow you?
So fortunately, we were blessed. My parents came 4 months later. And then Terry, my cousin's parents, came a month after that or something. And we were all in that little place in Miami for, maybe a couple months or something. And then we were relocated to Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Because that's so much like Cuba.
Oh my God. I joke that it was going from a tropical paradise to the North Pole. My fondest memories of Cuba and what I loved the most was the beach. We would spend a lot of time in the ocean, and I just have the images of the fine sand and the clear water. I loved it. And to end up in the snow, that was something. In 1962, there were not a lot of Latinos at all in Minneapolis. A few Cuban families. And the beauty was that people did support each other and they would get together. We created a community. And we ended up there because my parents did have friends from their hometown that had moved to Minneapolis for economic opportunities in the 50s. So it was unrelated to the revolution. So they were already established there.
Oh, got it.
And this was interesting because what I learned was my parents had wanted to come to California, to Los Angeles, because of course we were seeking warm weather. But they limited the numbers that they could relocate to different areas. So we would have had to wait longer.
Oh my gosh.
He wanted to work. And he's like, where can we go quicker? And Minneapolis was it. His first job was washing dishes. People do what they got to do. My mother, who'd been a teacher in Cuba, but had learned sewing, ended up making drapes for Sears. And, just a whole major change in our lives. Besides my cousin's family and mine, there was one other Cuban family in our Catholic school. And we were scholarship kids. And, they would ask us to stand up and and question our, a whole refugee experience. So it's definitely an experience of being other. And
definitely. Did your family speak English before coming here?
My father, to his credit, who loved American music, loved jazz. That was one of his sources for learning English. When he came to the States, he spoke English already. And he's my model for lifelong learner. I can tell you a story about that later. But he got engaged. He went to school all through his life. My beautiful papa. My mother hadn't learned English and studied and made an effort and broke spoken English, but not, she could make herself understood and understand, but she was not fluent.
I think that's what you say in sharing your parents' experience. And what I emphasize a lot on the podcast is that transition story, whether you're coming to the US on your own volition or you're coming out of a need for safety, is that you're leaving everything behind.
It blows my mind that people think that America is so wonderful, that there's no attachment to what they're leaving, that they would leave their families, their home, the tierra that their people came from, or their people are buried, that all the social connections, that they would leave that all behind just because America is so wonderful. There's no sense at all of the level of profound sacrifice to get here and recognition of what that means about why they're so desperate to leave conditions we have helped create.
Oh, I think that is another component that a lot of generations after this occurring never learned. I think there's a huge void. I know there's a huge void because it's when I feel like the US was its nastiest. It's that kids are not taught past the Cuba Revolution. They're not taught past that in grade school. And then it is completely glossed over in any higher education, whether it's high school or college. You never get back to American politics in the 60s and 70s to see the influence and the horrible contributions, interference, abuse that the U.S. did on the countries that this podcast really speaks to. El Salvador, Nicaragua, the Latin American countries, Cuba, the Caribbean, you name it, South America. It's like we have a huge, dirty hand in all of the reason why a lot of younger guests on this podcast whose parents fled, it's a good word, fled El Salvador for the same reason, political interference, very horrific, fled for their lives. They are really seeking understanding. The young women are seeking understanding, but the parents are not in a position to share that because of the trauma.
Yes. And I just have so much empathy. I had grown up obsessed with Cuba and wanting to go back to Cuba. I never felt disconnected to Cuba.
Yeah.
In 1979, I went back with a group from the diaspora of young people who had left, a lot of them Peter Pans who had left because it was their parents' decision and it was like returning home and reconnecting. But coming back, I realized I can understand why they can't revisit. I can understand why they can't go back and revisit all that and then have to leave again and have to face that it's not what it was.
How was it for you going back in 1979 as a young person to a country that at least you were from? You were 7.
Oh, it was life-changing. It was one of the highlights, one of the most important experiences of my life, for sure, because it helped me make sense. It validated this connection that I felt. I saw family again, and I was struck by how much we were really still alive for them. The obsession with Cuba was about trying to make sense of my life and what had happened to it. So I had been on a journey. I studied political science largely as part of that journey. So it was very validating and exciting. And the other part of it is that I met other Cuban Americans who were like me, who weren't fitting into this black and white view of Cuba, who were curious, who were wanting to reconnect. To have your mind open to that was radical.
Wow. That's actually where I get the name for the podcast, Life Links, the double X for women. Just because you're in a different location, your DNA does not know you are not in Cuba. And so you're trying to operate in the wrong environment for your DNA because your mind didn't say consciously, this is what we're going to do and this is we're going to have to do it this way. And therefore, it leaned on the DNA. The DNA is like, wait, what a minute. Something's missing. Something's wrong. You feel disconnected. You feel a fish out of water.
Certainly for me, that is. So that's where it's important to connect to that feeling because it can be subtle and you can disregard it and you can get seduced by all these other things and social media and everything coming your way. And those subtle feelings that are just little seeds of insight or, trying to tell you something.
Yeah.
Little voices. If you like disregard and just dump a bunch of stuff on top of it, there's so much richness you are cutting yourself from and again may lead to that misalignment. I can talk about it intellectually, etc. But the whole thing about feeling Cuba is visceral. And as a child, even as an adolescent, and even as a college student studying it from an academic perspective versus from my personal life, the feeling has always been there.
If you feel you need to connect with the culture, act on it. It is the piece that may be missing because it's part of you and no one can explain it away. You shouldn't explain it away.
I would say, again, talking to the young Latinas maybe wanting to connect with their parents and finding the parents not wanting to have the conversation. One way to connect is through music.
I like that idea.
I left political science and kind of the more straight ahead activist work that I did in my 20s. I learned it was easier to break down the walls through music and culture. That you could use that as a way to connect as human beings and find something in common and ease the conflict and the differences and know that there was something in common you could build on. And so I became much more of a believer in that. And that's where I ended up expanding on after my retirement. I'm a real strong believer in the power of art and artistic expression to open those doors, to help us get perspective, learn to empathize, expand our ability to empathize, all that stuff.
Yeah, true understanding and appreciation. People are more prone to be open-minded to music, new music, unknown music, than they are to people, the people behind it. When you speak of the documentary that you have collaboration with, you spoke of Bobi. Explain to our listeners, Bobi.
Bobi is Bobi Céspedes. We have known each other, 41 years or something. Bobi is singer, songwriter, educator, and a priestess in the Lukumí tradition. Sometimes also referred to as Santeria. We prefer to refer to it as Lukumí, which is how the people in Cuba, the Lukumí, and those are the descendants, the Afro Yoruba descendants in Cuba. So she's an elder in the community and she's a storyteller and has done workshops on the songs and stories. I moved to the Bay Area from New Haven, Connecticut with my daughter's father, who is her nephew. He wanted to create music with Bobi and her brother, who had recently come from Cuba. They're part of this beautiful musical family, Céspedes. They had a musical group and initially started as a trio, the three of them, and then expanded to a whole band that recorded an LP that I was a part of producing, like back in 1985, and then 3 albums, and they toured internationally, etc. They were, I think the hottest Latin band in the Bay Area in their time in the 1980s. It was kind of pre-world music, and they didn't fit into the salsa category. It was like before there was the right category to put them in, because it was very much based on Cuban music and Afro-Cuban music and Afro-Cuban chants and rhythms from the Lukumí, and a lot of jazzy elements. So very distinctive sound, just really powerful. So we go way back. She was there when my daughter was born, and Bobi was there singing to Yemaya. When I thought about my retirement plan, I had set myself up to be able to continue to consult, because I was essentially an internal management consultant and coach and educator and facilitator. I had helped design leadership development programs and taught in them and developed mentoring and coaching programs, and had come into diversity and had developed programs in diversity and inclusion. Lots of stuff that was wonderful, that again, very much in alignment with my values.
Yeah.
I'm very blessed to say, because it is a blessing. Not everyone gets to say this, but a very rewarding career. Towards the end, I was teaching salsa classes. One day we get lunchtime. I'm like, in an engineering organization. And then, I taught a 6-week series on Cuban music, on the roots of salsa, focused on Cuban music during Hispanic Heritage Month. I did it with a lot of passion and love and got a lot of rewards for it. But it was like, it wasn't coming to me. I wasn't feeling it in my heart. And I did go through this process, or like this period of crises where like, am I getting lazy in my old age? If you know me, like you kind of recognize that that's a joke, because I'm pretty active.
You're nonstop. In a good way. In a good way.
I'm trying to get better at that, but I am fairly driven. And then I just realized, like, it's not what's calling me now. Yeah. I just finally let go and listen to my heart. And the music was what was calling me. So I have been Bobi's manager going on 7 years now. And my first big project was to work with the Smithsonian. We got an invitation to be one of the groups that was there for the inauguration of the African American Museum in September of 2016. And President Obama was there for the inauguration. And, it's a huge event.
It was.
And so it was all the coordination, bringing the band down for this. It was beautiful, really memorable. And, just been learning the ropes since then. In 2019, we got into the studio and Bobi recorded her 3rd album, this one under her own name with her band. And it's all 100% original material. It's the first time she'd done that. In the past, she'd recorded a combination of original material and other. And it's the album that she feels most expresses her and her music. And I think it's beautiful, beautiful album. I'm very proud of it. There's this whole beautiful mythology that are the ways that the culture teaches, principles by which to live on. And those are very much a part of her music.
What is the name of her 3rd album again?
Mujer y Cantante.
Oh.
And that's available through our website too. And it's also on Amazon. It's on Spotify, etc. But if you're interested in the disc itself, we did print the CD.
Oh, okay. Let's play some of Bobi's third album here. This song is called El Choco Choco.
I think her music is, it's soulful. It's moving. I find it very sexy. I definitely step into another being just listening to it. Bobi's music for me reaches a place, like you say, it reaches a place really deep that I thrive at. That is my person. And that is really difficult for me to access here in the US. And you're doing an immense gift back to humanity by being that bridge for Bobi, especially during COVID and now globally, where you can bring her classes to people and people need these classes for healing. And that is as much value because that may never have happened for a lot of reasons.
Does have a really distinctive sound. Part of the power comes from that integration for her because she is priestess, teacher, singer, songwriter, and she brings that all to her work. We did an interview with her for this virtual arts program. And one of the things I still remember from that interview is her talking about, I've lived one life. You know, she says, I've lived one life. And I'm like, Ashe, that's
exactly.
Truly. And I'm humbled by her level of devotion, devotion in the spiritual sense. And so everything that she does is integrated and in alignment with that. And it's really powerful. And part of what she's doing through her music is teaching, sharing certain principles, celebrating the heritage, and also kind of sharing how do you live that on a day-to-day. So we're working now on expanding what we do virtually. We have had the song classes going for more than 2 years now.
Wow.
The rhythms, I mean, salsa you dig, you're going to get back to the rhythms that come from these music and lots of references, musical references to these chants, these songs.
So the chants and the songs are to the
Orishas, and the way I explain it, that they are expressions of the divine. They are natural in nature, the expressions of the divine. There is Olodumare, the supreme being. So there is this one God, supreme being, but they are, you know, I think of them as divinities or avatars that express the forces of nature. So Yemaya is the ocean and represents motherhood, and Oshun is the river, and represents the sweet water, but also represents all of civilization and the work associated, like cities grow next to rivers, right?
Yeah.
So, without getting deeper into that, they represent divine forces. And so integral to the religion is a recognition that nature is divine and to be respected and praised, etc. So it's a very rich tradition, and all these Orishas have songs and dances and rhythms that are associated with them, that are played to both trace and to call on them.
Are these classes that anybody can sign up for?
Yes, absolutely. And you can find them on our website. So it's bobicespedes.com, and it's BOBI Céspedes, CESPEDES.com. And if you go to our website, there is a thing at the top to online song classes, and you can click on that and then see the list of classes. It is particularly of interest to practitioners, but other people, dancers, musicians, or, people interested in this traditional culture who want to just spend time like singing to the ocean goddess, the mother, singing to the great healer. So I facilitate the classes, on the chat. And then we've got people in Bobi Studio, the musicians.
Okay.
So it's Bobi and two drummers. Actually one drummer, a percussionist, and they both sing. Again, alignment. How do you create alignment? Part of it, it is that consciousness of creating alignment in your values, but you got to feed yourself. How do you provide that nourishment for your heart and your spirit? And singing is one of those ways. And it's a way to heal too.
Yeah. It would almost be meditative, it sounds like. Because it detaches you from your brain. The brain is not meant to guide us. Your soul, your spirit, your heart, they know what you should be doing. Your brain facilitates what they're telling you to do, but your brain is not what makes your choices. The brain is not going to heal you. You have to heal the brain. You have to shut it off in order to heal the brain. They say that even the best healing, obviously, is while you sleep. Well, your brain is not doing the thinking while you're asleep. You really need to put it aside. So I can see this. These song classes must be just joyfully refreshing and healing. And like you say, filling back the vessel of your soul that is getting drained in your everyday for yourself and for others. You really need a source to come back and refill so that you can keep being you, right? Keep doing what brings you joy.
Absolutely.
Yes. Beautiful. I'll make sure to add that information into our show notes. That is the description of every episode of whatever streaming platform you use, and the article that is a synopsis of this episode, and we'll have that up on our website at thelinks.com. That's LNXX. So people can sign up for these virtual classes and join in Bobi's songs, chants to the Orishas, and learn the traditions of the Lukumí.
Also, in this stage of my life, what gives me meaning that is of service, a broader service.
Yeah.
And it could be, certainly with Bobi, it's both family that pulls me, Bobi as an artist, and as my best, one of my best friends and my sister, all those things she is. And at the same time, this commitment to, this has been an oral culture. And she was born to this. It wasn't something she learned in college, through the academy.
You speak of having a very lifelong love of music and dance. And you spoke earlier of your father and his learning English language through music. What was his love of music and how did that affect you?
My papa, I think he just loved music naturally. So my father was into Benny Goodman. That's how Benny Moré got his name. And some of my earliest memories of my father, he had a record player, those from the 50s, by his bedside in our home. And I still remember particularly the albums by the Platters and Johnny Mathis. Mm-hmm. So I have that memory of him from very early on.
Did you sit there and listen to the music with him?
Yeah, I made an impression.
Mm-hmm.
And my uncle had an appliance and record store that had a part that sold records and had the little rooms in the 50s you could go into these little side rooms to listen to the album. And I remember going there and how cool it was to, listen. So, music was around me. I have real clear memory of going through the albums and looking at them and liking particular album covers by Orquesta Aragon and Benny Moré and Trio Matamoros, all these classics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And particular songs that just really touched me in some mysterious way. That my connection to Cuba, once I left Cuba, was very much grounded in music.
Mm-hmm. Right. Spoke to your soul, kept you connected.
That was that visceral part. The way that music could touch this very deep, profound place.
Okay. Actually, only now I realize you have always been immersed in music from your childhood in Cuba. And love of your papa. You are truly blessed, and we are so grateful for you finding your way back to the music. With Bobi Céspedes, her band, and the passing on of the Lukumí culture and spiritual chants to the Orishas.
So we'll have all the information that you shared with us, Bobi's information and the website information that will be in the show notes in the episode so they can click through to the link. And then we'll also have an article to summarize what you were talking about here so people can get access to the websites, perhaps join the song classes, listen to the music.
I said thank you.
I'm so grateful to have you here on the episode, telling us so much information that I doubt very many people know, especially the younger people, but we lived it. I lived it from here, and I had never heard any of this until I met you, until we had that one day you even shared it. It's just necessary, and it fills a very big void in our understanding of Cuba and the people and even the current situation. So I really appreciate you sharing and the time you offered here today. Thank you so much, Marty.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. That was so much fun. It's easy to talk to you. You're going to have quite a task editing this down.
Right? But I absolutely love what I do here on the Lifelinks podcast, and I am the one blessed for this opportunity to learn from all the vivacious and intelligent Latinas that kindly share their time with me. Their stories are so unique, so individual and enlightening that I really want to expand to more women, more stories, so our narrative gets larger and larger across the globe. Remember to listen in next week for our Pod Club episode on what you heard here today and further celebrating Black History Month as we dive further into the contributions of Afro Latina singers and songwriters. And a special shout out next Wednesday, just like I reminded, to a unique cafecito place that has graciously come to Oakland. I first caught them in San Francisco, and just now this week, they opened in Oakland. You may have caught it on our Instagram stories already, so keep an eye out. I'll give you a hint. It's a Yemeni coffee house. And it is so beautiful and smells so good. And we haven't even gotten to the desserts yet, let alone the cafecito. To our listeners, thank you so much for engaging in this community, lending your support and reinforcing our narrative in our own words, in our own time. Thank you for subscribing to this podcast and sharing it with your friends to keep us growing and providing for more women to share their stories. I honestly feel we need a daily show. Wouldn't you just love to hear these stories every day? Because honestly, every other week, and me taking a couple of breaks, we only get to like 20, 25 women a year. And that is not enough to cover the brilliance of the Latina comunidad everywhere in the world. Let's make that happen together. Step into your truth, ladies. Ciao.
Really appreciate the time you take to rate and review the podcast. Get the backstory and what you've heard here today and reach out to us at thelinks.com. That's LNXX. Because it's about time, it's about us. Stay in the groove on our social media at Lifelinks and get ready to make your move, ladies. Viva!